Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our discussion on Barnabas. Today is Thursday. I want to talk about one of my favorite Barnabas accounts in the Bible. A little bit of background for those who haven't been following. Paul and Barnabas, or actually Saul and Barnabas, he was going by the name Saul then, met after Saul's conversion experience, and Barnabas introduced him to the apostles so that he could get their hand, get the right hand of fellowship, and he could go and preach and be among the disciples and be welcomed among them. And after that, the next time we see Barnabas and Saul is when Barnabas goes to Tarsus to bring Saul back to Antioch to help him work in the church there. So now they're in Antioch, and this is about a year later after they've been there. They've been teaching and preaching in Antioch. And in chapter 13, starting in verse 1, it says, Now there were in the church at Antioch prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, a lifelong friend of Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, Set apart Barnabas and Saul for the work for which I have called them. Then, after fasting and praying, they laid hands on them and sent them off. So this is the beginning of Barnabas and Saul's first missionary journey, and they cross over. They sail over to the island of Cyprus, which isn't that far. It's just a little ways across the Mediterranean Sea. And they start at one end of Cyprus and they go to the other. When they get to a city called Paphos, they have a run-in with a guy named Elymas. Elymas is a magician, and he offered to buy the gift of God to be able to lay hands on people and for them to be able to be filled with the Holy Spirit. Well, Paul's response to him in verse 9 says, But Saul, who was also called Paul, and then he went on and gave his response. But what I want to focus on here in this just right now is the fact that this is the first time that Paul is called Paul. It's been several years now since his conversion experience, but he's only called Paul here first. And I think that's because he was going to the Gentiles, so he was using his Gentile name. Paul was his Gentile name. Saul was his Hebrew name. He's referred to Saul a couple more times, but only when he's given testimony before people, and he refers to himself as Saul when he was on the road to Tarsus. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is this is from before this, it was always Barnabas and Saul, and now, if you'll notice, it's Saul and Barnabas. So Barnabas here was the leader when they started out, and he was the chief speaker, and now Paul has taken over that. So we see the mentor has caught up with the teacher. The student is caught up and passed the teacher, and Barnabas is okay with this. He takes a back seat to Paul and lets Paul continue on. And that's one of the things I want to say, that when we teach people and they catch up with us and pass us and go on to do greater works, rejoice in that, because God has used you to reach out to them and touch them, and you have a part in the work that he's doing because of the work that you did for him. And so from now on, it's Paul and Barnabas, and we know that Paul is the chief speaker now, because it says, I think in chapter 15, that when they were on, or 14, when they were on their first missionary journey, along the way, one of the cities confused them for gods, and they started to call Barnabas Hermes, and Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. So we know that Paul was kind of taking the lead role. So don't be afraid if if people you teach surpass you. That's a good thing. And I know I've had a lot of guys in the Navy when I was a chief that I wrote evals and awards for, and those guys caught up with me and passed me, and I looked at the advancement list and kept looking, And I saw those guys pass me, and I was glad and rejoiced with them when they made senior chief and master chief. And so if you guys are out there watching this, I'm proud of you. And everyone have a great day. Go out and be a light to someone in a dark world. Have a great day.